Howdy folks, Spencer here, and today is the first in a new series that I'm doing where I'm going to sit down and walk you through some theorycraft ideas for how to build some of these ships that we're getting in Star Trek Online. Now today I'm going to be covering the Farragut Temporal Cruiser. That's a new lockbox ship we got on PC earlier in October. Console is getting it in November. And I'm also going to be taking a look at the new C-Store Federation Command Carrier bundle. So that is the Seneca Command Carrier and the Valdres Command Strike Wing Escort. Now, when it comes to the builds on these ships that I'm going to be theory crafting, I'm going to be focused on the bridge officer setups. Any of you that have played the game for a reasonable amount of time should know that the gear that you use on the ships, the weapons, most of that stuff just transfers over between ships. The thing that really differentiates ships when you get down to it is the bridge officer seating. Of course, a ship having a 5-3 weapons layout versus a 4-4, can be impactful also. But when you get right down into it, the bridge officer seating is what really makes each ship really unique. And just to demonstrate how these builds are often similar, just looking at some builds over on the builds Discord, when you look through something like the Canon DPS builds, you see a lot of similarities in the builds posted, and these are on a wide variety of ships, and there's many that have very similar aspects. Some of them might use different torpedoes, but when you look at them, a lot of the things are using a lot of the same elements. It's just a matter of figuring out, what flavor of energy weapons are you going to run and how are you going to boost those up. So that would change some of your universal console choices, things like that. But really, the basic summary of what I'm trying to say here is what matters most with ships, what really makes them unique, is the bridge officer seating. And once you understand how to build the seating on the ship, you can move on from there to actually gear it out and, figure out what gear that you would want to put on it. So I'm going to focus on the bridge officer seating here for all of the ships. I'm not going to cover specific gear recommendations. For some of these, I might be doing build videos in the future. And I know for the Norway, I'm going to be picking that up tomorrow when that comes out and probably doing a stream with it. But let's get back on track here and let's start off with the Farragut. So for the Farragut, we have a temporal operative seat here with a secondary pilot seat. The way that I would build the Farragut, especially as a 4-4, is going to be beam overload. So I would set the Farragut up as a beam overload build. Now for the commander engineer with temporal operative, the first slot is almost always going to be emergency powered engines 1. Then for the second slot, being that this is temporal operative, you have to remember, has some of the better unconventional systems procs. So I would run chronometric inversion field 1. I'll type these out just to make sure you guys understand what I'm putting in here. I would do emergency power to weapons 3 and recursive shearing 3. So that's what I would do there for the commander engineer. It's a little bit bigger. Now on the lieutenant commander science, I would do a tractor beam 1 because that's an unconventional systems proc. I would probably do, if you're taking this into just general content, I would do a photonic officer 1 just to have some redundancy for cooldown reduction. And then I would do a grav well 1 just to get some control on the map. On the lieutenant tac, with a beam overload setup, I'm going to say Hemosite 1 and then cannon scatter volley 1. So a lot of people don't get this when you do the beam overload builds is when you do beam overload, it's beneficial to have a cannon scatter volley on your ship, especially if you're use, well, really, if you're using the preferential targeting trait off of the NX, when you are doing a beam overload build and you have that preferential targeting trait on, every time you hit cannon scatter volley, you're getting a 100% cat 1 damage boost for your beam overload for the next 20 seconds. You don't even have to have cannons on. You literally just hit cannon scatter volley on your build and you get that damage boost, and that is the trait off of the NX. It also comes off the legendary NX in the 10th anniversary pack for those of you that want it on account unlock. Now with this Farragut, I would make the Lieutenant Commander Universal with Pilot attack. You pretty much are forced to. And if you want to run a pilot ability, you could do Pilot Team 1 just to get the speed boost from it. But Pilot does not have a ton of very useful abilities, especially when we look at PvE scenarios. Then I would do Attack Pattern Beta 1. Basically, for 99% of people, Attack Pattern Beta is the only attack pattern they should run. A lot of people like Delta, especially for tanking. I don't think Delta is really worth it for tanking anymore. On all my tanks that I use in high-end content, I only run Beta. Attack Pattern Omega is cool, but I would only ever use that nowadays on really niche tort builds that are taking advantage of the Assault Formation Theta trait from the legendary Talus. And then, of course, Beam Overload 3. And for the Ensign Engineer here, we can actually move this emergency power to engines over to this Ensign Engineer. And then on this Ensign seat here, we can put in another temporal ability, and Heisenberg Amplifier is actually a temporal ability that is an uncon proc, so Heisenberg Amplifier. So if I was building out the Farragut for beam overload, I would probably go with the setup like this. And if you don't want to do the pilot team, which you probably wouldn't want to do if you if you're just going to put it on spam bar, these team abilities like tac team, inch team, side team, pilot team, intel team, they're all notorious for causing interruptions in your firing cycle. So putting anything like a pilot team on your spam bar is going to have a performance impact because they have a second activation time where you're not able to do anything else. So if you don't want to deal with that, then you could do distributed targeting 1. But if you wanted to have a pilot ability on there, then the pilot team 1 would work and would also be a speed boost. Now this setup here would be a bit of a glass cannon setup, but you do have 2 firing modes that are going to be able to trigger both your comp engines, and if you need more survivability, you could look at grabbing some of the colony tac consoles that will give you a heal. They have a heal proc on them that has a chance to trigger every time you hit a firing mode. So if you need survivability, you've got the cannon scatter volley and the beam overload to potentially trigger some of those colony consoles if you need that survivability. But overall, this is how I'd set up the Farragut. It's not the best ship in the game. I would say that really the only people that should pick up the Farragut are people that are looking at getting it for the Space Barbie aspect. I just don't think the ship itself, is good. But like I was saying before, I might do a review on it at some point. I did end up actually picking one up because I wanted to try the console out in DPS runs. And here's a little spoiler. They did reduce the time it takes for this console on the Farragut to activate, but it still takes 10 seconds from when you launch it until it actually blows up. And I'm having issues with that even in elite content. I've taken it into infecteds, hives, and most of the enemies are dead before that 10 seconds is up. So this is really just a Space Barbie ship. But if you do want to use it for Space Barbie, there's a beam overload setup that would work well on it. And I know someone's probably going to say, well, what if I want to do a tank on it? Let's copy this setup. And how would you change this to run a tank on this ship? Well, you could keep the recursive, or you could just go to reverse shield polarity 1 or 3 there. Swap the beam overload 3 for a fire at will 3. And then you could swap the distributed targeting to like a torp spread. And then if you did this, you would swap the cannon scatter volley over to like a rapid fire if you wanted to retain the colony tac console procs there. Because if you're doing a tank with this, you would be doing probably an ETM setup. So entwined tactical matrices from the Gagarin. And in that case, you would be doing like 7 beam arrays plus a torpedo. So you would be firing torpedoes off every, or quite often, to trigger an ETM to extend your fire at will uptime. So you could reverse the fire at will and the torp spread also if you want to do torp spread 3 and then a fire at will 1. I know some people do that with their tanks. But either of these setups would work on the ship. Beam overload would be my recommendation. I just do not think the Farragut is the best tanking option. But that's how you'd build the Farragut. Now let's take a look at the Seneca or the Hiawatha. And let's just go down to the fleet version of it here. Yeah. So I've already got the seating on it. Now let's say for this first build, I want to set this ship up as a tank. And I know that sounds crazy, but the issue with the Seneca and the Hiawatha, and I already talked about this in the last 2 videos I did talking about the ship, it doesn't get a secondary deflector. So when it comes to actual science-based things, it's a bit underwhelming. And it's only got the 2 hangar bays. These science carriers are notorious for being a bit underpowered. Every one of them that we've had in the game so far has not really been that great of a ship, and this is no exception. So with the commander science, with command, I would do tractor beam 1. That's just a really good low cooldown unconventional systems proc. Then you could do photonic officer. That, you know, photonic officer is always nice. Now, here's where it gets a bit tricky. If you're wanting to set this up as a tank, you would probably want to run Suppression Barrage 3, in which case you're going to be running just a Gravity Well 1, and then you do Suppression Barrage 3. This means you cannot run a CF3 at the same time. It's just not possible with the seating gear. So for the Lieutenant Commander TAC, I would probably do fire at will 1, attack pattern beta 1, and then a torp spread 3. And if I was doing this, I would do, it's a 3-3 weapon setup, so you would do 5 beam arrays plus a torpedo, and you again would use ETM, entwined tactical matrices, from the Gagarin to get your fire at will uptime to be higher. On Lieutenant Commander Engineer, Mercy Power 2 engines. Basically every ship I have is going to have Mercy Powered engines. For the second slot there, we could do Reverse Shield Polarity 1. Could also do a heal there, Aux to Damp, Aux to Bat if you want to trigger Cold Hearted. Then I would do a Mercy Power to Weapons 3. On the Ensign Science, probably do Jam Sensors 1. Just for the unconventional systems proc. And then for the Lieutenant Universal with Miracle Worker, there's just nothing really great to put here. The Miracle Worker stuff at this lower level isn't that amazing. But I could see people going in and doing like narrow sensor bands 1. Next. I could see people doing that. or something like that on this ship. Like, this isn't perfect. There's a reason so few of you voted for this ship in the poll, and it's because the Seneca or Hiawatha is just an incredibly weak ship. So I'd probably go with something like this. It's not good. Like, I'll tell you that it's not the best tanking option out there, but that's nothing new. The entire ship is incredibly weak. Now let's see, what would this look like if you wanted to set the ship up as a support? So I would drop the torp spread. I would move the fire wheel. Actually, if I was setting this thing up as a support, probably keep the fire at will 1, chemosite 2 to get a little bit more debuff, and I'd have the highest rank of beta that I could get. I would run structural integrity lapse, or that'd be 2, and then I'd run let it go 3. It's fine. And on the American worker seat here, I'd run more science stuff. So I guess you could run like a heal. No, what's the there's a debuff bridge officer ability here that you can run. Let me pull it up. It's not chemosite, but let me go down here and find it. Science. Structural analysis. Structural. And destabilizing. One. I'd run a grab wheel 3, and I would run a concentrate fire power 3, and then this would be like an okay torp support. It's not perfect, of course, but I've already said that this ship, it's a bit rough. Now, for the ensign science, I think jam sensors can go in that first slot. Let me double check that. Yeah, Benson. Okay. So the point of something like jam sensors is that it's an unconventional systems proc. So on this build, you would have tractor beam, Ravwell, jam sensors. So you'd have just 3 uncons. Yeah, like I said, really weak ship. There's just not much you can really do with it. And if you were wanting to DPS on the ship, I don't even know what to tell you for DPS on it. Like, it's not going to be a good torp boat. It's not really good for anything, This ship is just incredibly weak. So that would be my take on the Seneca or Hiawatha as more of a support role, which I think is really what the ship is, more intended for. It even comes with brand new support pets, which aren't good, but that's the theme that they're going with the ship, and it is just a really weak ship for the reasons that I've already talked about a ton. So let's take a look now at the Norway. And for this, you have many options. So let's take a look at the commander tack with command. Let's say you want to set this up as a cannon, scatter, volley setup here, which I think would be the most optimal for this ship. So on the lieutenant or the commander attack with command, I would do chemo 1, attack pattern beta 1, then cannon, scatter, volley 2, and then I'd probably do call emergency artillery 3. Now, some of you would probably want to reverse the cannon scatter volley and the artillery around. And you can do that, but Call Emergency Artillery 3 will do a lot of damage to grouped up targets, so it should really not be ignored. It is quite solid. So here I'm going to do the same thing I did on the Seneca. I'm going to do Tractor Beam 1, Photonic Officer 1, and a Grab Well 1. On Lieutenant Tack, we're going to go with a Beam Overload 1, and for the second slot, you have a bit of flexibility. Let's see here. You just think of what else you could do. I mean, I guess just for right now, we'll just say distributed targeting. Lieutenant Inge would be emergency power to engines 1 and emergency power to weapons 2. On the Lieutenant Universal with Intel, I would use both abilities as Intel, so it doesn't matter what you put there. So I'll just say it's another tack. And we're going to run Viral Impulse first. Really good uncon proc. And then I'm going to run Override Subsystem Safeties 2 for the extra power boost. Now, if you're wanting to do some more advanced stuff, another option you could do here, and what I should change here actually is let's do Chemo 2, and then in this Ensign slot, some people might want to do like a reroute power from life support combo with Override Subsystem Safeties. That can net a little bit extra performance, but for 99% of people, that's not going to be worth it. So I'm just going to mark this as distributed targeting 1. And that's how I would set this up for cannon scatter volley. So let's see how I would change this for beam overload. So for beam overload, obviously, I'm going to start off by moving the cannon scatter volley down to a 1. Again, this is going to be used to trigger preferential targeting off the NX if you have that trait. It can also be used as a comp engine proc to get a speed boost, or you can use it as a proc if you want to run colony tack consoles to get some additional healing. So I'm going to put my beam overload 3, and then drop this down to chemo 1. And yeah, that's all you would really have to change between these two builds to go from cannon scatter volley to beam overload. Like, they're not that different. Now, if you want to do torps on this build, let's see how that would look. And one of the reasons, like, that this ship is not really getting a ton of recommendations for torpedoes is because you're forced to choose between having high yield 3 and or a concentrate firepower 3. And concentrate firepower is a must. That video I did the other day about torpedo negatives really shows what happens if you don't have CF on. So let's see here. I would drop the distributed targeting for a fire at will 1. The reason for that is with these torpedo builds, the way that you get torpedo spreads is not by slotting a torpedo spread. Rather, you will use fire at will and cannon scatter volley to trigger the entwined tactical matrices trait off of the Gagarin, which is a sea store ship that I've mentioned a few times in this video so far. And the trait entwined tactical matrices is often called ETM. And basically, when you hit cannon scatter volley or fire at will, it will give you a torpedo spread. And if you hit torpedo spread, it will give you a fire at will and cannon scatter volley. So you will often see that every high-end torp boat basically has the cannon scatter volley and the fire at will on. If I go up to some of my builds in here, like you see on my DPS tooth build here from a while back, Fire at will, cannon scatter volley. Literally there just to trigger entwine tactical matrices. That's how I get my torp spreads on my torp builds. And then you would drop the override subsystem safeties to a high yield 2. And then the downside with this build is if you were wanting to run mines, you don't really you would have to drop your attack pattern beta 1, which is going to be a performance hit. You don't need the lieutenant engineer to have a emergency powered weapons though with a torp build. Torpedoes do not factor in weapon power. So for this you could do like emit unstable warp bubble if you wanted another uncon proc. If you wanted something for speed, maybe ox to dampeners. If you wanted to heal, ox to structural integrity field would work. So this is how I'd set it up for a torp build. And I don't think there's any other way that I'd really recommend to set the ship up. Now, you could certainly set it up as like a support or tank if you really wanted. I wouldn't recommend it, but you know, given that this does have a commander command, you could probably do a tank with it. In fact, let's see what that would look like here. Let's take a look at what a tank would look like on this specific ship. So let's say you're gonna do like a hybrid torp. Let's just do a Firewall 3. And then this would go to torp spread 1. Drop the cannon scatter volley. You could swap this over to a cannon rapid fire if you want to retain an additional competitive engine trigger for the speed boost, or if you want to keep it as an extra proc for the colony attack consoles, you could do that too. It's colony cannon rapid fire 1 there. Yeah, it's this, like, it wouldn't be the best tank in the world for sure. Like, this thing would probably get popped quite easily, but if you have the resources to get colony attack consoles and really want to go down that route, you could probably turn this into a fairly solid tanking platform. Especially, it'd be fine to handle lower difficulty content like normal and advanced, I would say. And if you want to do support with the Norway, specifically, let me clarify, torpedo support. Oh, and I should mention, this would be suppression barrage. I did forget to change that. So the tank setup would have suppression barrage, not a call emergency artillery. And then it would have concentrate firepower 3. These support builds do not care about their DPS. In fact, when I look at, you know, the support builds I have in the runs that I do at a higher DPS level, we want the supports to do like under 50k, you know, ideally as low as possible is good most of the time. Yeah, I mean this would work fine. You wouldn't really need a OSS 2 here, so you could do EMP probe for another uncon proc. And for the lieutenant engineer, probably another emit unstable warp bubble. And then you could drop the photonic officer on this build, because if you're running a torp support, you're in a much more organized environment, and there's going to be multiple people probably running like the Baron trait, to give team-wide bridge officer cooldown reduction. So this could be another uncon also. It could also be a debuff, so you could do distributed targeting one, or not distributed, resonating. I gotta think here. Yeah, you could same the destabilizing resonance beam you could do in that lieutenant slot. You could also do structural analysis if you wanted another uncon. You could do like scramble sensors, sham sensors. I think for me, I'd probably do stabilizing. So that's probably how I'd build it for torp support. Yeah, I mean it would work. Is it going to be the best torpedo support in the game? Not really, but it would work. Like the Norway, the reason I'm going for the Norway, and I think the reason a lot of you, a lot more people chose the Norway in the poll I put out than the Hiawatha, is because the Norway is just a really flexible ship with how its setup is. It's not the best, it's not the best ship, out there, but it is a fairly versatile platform with the bridge officer setup that it has, so you can go out and do a variety of different builds on it. And going back to the Seneca, the way that it's set up is it's much more limited. You could do like some of these builds on it. Like you could probably put torps, beam overload, CSV on the Seneca and do fine, especially for normal and advanced. Anything will do fine there. But the Seneca and Hiawatha just I really wouldn't recommend for really any reason. I think even as a torp support or a tank platform, it's not that good. The Farragut, I think it's a fun immersion ship for, people looking for this specific space Barbie aspect of it. But the ship itself, it is a bit more limited than some of the other options out there. I don't know. So this is the first take on doing a video like this. I'm curious to see what you guys think. Is it boring in this format? Do I need to make sure my head's not in the way? Apparently, I didn't realize my head was blocking the suppression barrage there. Do I need to change the format? Is this easy enough for you guys to understand? Do I need to go more in depth on things? Let me know. This is, like I said, the first take on doing like a little Theorycraft build plan like this with the bridge officer setup. So let me know what you think. If you try out any of these bridge officer combos on any of these ships that I've talked about here, let me know how they work for you. I am picking up the Norway on Thursday if I can use my T6 coupon on it. It's a gift one that I got, so it should work. So if that does work for me, then I'll grab the Norway on Thursday and probably do a stream. And the build that I'm going to go with is going to be the cannon scatter volley one. I think that's what works best with the Norway. Some of you will disagree, but that's just personal preference. I think cannon scatter volley is the best firing mode for 90% of content in the game. So that's my personal bias. I'll be going with CSV on it if I do end up getting it on Thursday. So yeah, let me know what you think. Feedback is appreciated down below. And if there's another way that you'd build these ships out, I'd be curious to hear, because the way that I build ships is going to be different from how some of you build ships, and I think it's it's interesting to see the decisions that other people take with their builds. I'm looking at most of this from like a meta standpoint, a DPS focused, trying to maximize procs for unconventional systems to increase the amount of cooldown reduction I get from my consoles. So I'm clearly biased in a few different ways with this stuff, and yeah, some of you will definitely have different ways you build ships. This is not the only way to build these ships. These are just the ways that I would build these ships. But that's going to be it for me today. So thank you all for sticking around for the 30 or so minutes this has been going. Hopefully this has been helpful, but there is more stow content coming soon, especially for the Norway, so stay tuned for that. But that's going to be it for me today. Thank you for watching. See you guys next time.